Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture Lecture Series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, New St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, Crossing New Frontiers to Conquer Today's Challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, New St. Augustine.
Who is Philip Emeagwali, and why is he in the USA? Thursday, March 21, 1974 was an important date in my life. The previous night, I slept on a thin mat on the bare concrete floor of a tiny room in the backyard of 49 Okesuna Street, Lagos. I came to the US Embassy in Victoria Island, Lagos, to pick up my travel passport that was stamped with an F1 student visa that was approved 24 hours earlier. After picking up my F1 student visa, I took a taxi that was a 5-passenger Peugeot 404 sedan and traveled from Lagos Motor Park to Asaba Main Market. From 3 o'clock in the morning, I made the perilous, lengthy trek to my parents' house that was along Nebisi Road. Their compound in Asaba was next to that of a Catholic priest named Patrick Uboko. Their rental 2-bedroom apartment was a short stroll past Asaba Girls Grammar School called AGGS and adjacent to Uzuigwe Primary School that was near St. Patrick's College and General Hospital, Asaba. That night, I slept for only 2 hours. Then I spent the next 12 hours dashing around to get a traveler's check of $134 from the Barclays Bank that was near Bright Street, Onitsha. Then I returned library books to Onitsha Public Library. Finally, I hugged my friends and relatives at 6 Wilkinson Road, Onitsha. That evening, I returned to Asaba to spend my last night with my parents and siblings. After late-night conversations with my parents and a 2-hour sleep, I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning of Saturday, March 23, 1974. My flight to Portland, Oregon, USA required that I arrive at the Ikeja Airport of Lagos and be there in 10 hours after I woke up. I was then 19 years old and had never seen an airplane that was parked on the ground. My first thought of studying in the USA began 4 years earlier, in mid-1970 at age 15, when I was living along Venn Road, Onitsha, Nigeria. After the Nigerian Civil War ended on January 15, 1970, the economy of Onitsha was in total shambles, and coming to the USA in the early 1970s was a far-fetched dream that evoked laughter whenever I mentioned it. Their laughter stopped after I received a scholarship from Monmouth, Oregon. That scholarship took effect from September 10, 1973. Around 7:30 in the morning of March 23, 1974, I said goodbye to my parents and to the 5 of my 7 siblings that were still at home. I also said goodbyes to tenants in our compound. At about 5 o'clock that evening, I boarded a Pan American aircraft for my 36-hour flight from Ikeja Airport of Nigeria to the airport in Portland, Oregon. My Lagos-Portland flight was 36 hours long because it included 4 stopovers in Monrovia, Liberia, Dakar, Senegal, New York City, and Chicago. In early 1974, only a few Africans traveled to the USA. For that reason, my Pan Am flight originated from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. To fill up the airline seats, it picked up passengers from 1 or 2 stopovers in perhaps Kinshasa, Congo, and then picked up about a dozen passengers in Lagos, Nigeria. As an aside, Pan Am built many of the original airports in West Africa. In the 1960s and early 1970s, Pan Am and BOAC, the acronym for the British Overseas Airways Corporation, were the 2 major airlines that served Africa. The idea of coming to the USA came into my mind in mid-1970 at age 15. One late school day afternoon, I saw my classmate at Christ the King College, Onitsha, Chris Chiedu Opudele. Chiedu held a tiny pamphlet that piqued my interest. It was a slim college brochure from MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, USA. That MIT brochure was where I got the idea of coming to the USA. But it seemed far-fetched at the time and place, which was about 6 months after the Biafran War ended and the Onitsha economy was completely ruined. I expected to come to the USA because I was considered a top student and therefore assumed that I will be offered a scholarship to MIT or Harvard. Fast forward to September 10, 1973. I got a scholarship to Oregon, USA, and for that reason, I never applied to MIT or Harvard. In late May 1973, and 3 months before I got a scholarship to the USA, we had an extended family meeting at 6 Wilkinson Road, Onitsha. That was the compound of my maternal grandfather, Chieka Balong. That meeting was chaired by my maternal uncle, Orofo Balong, and maternal aunt, Nkemdelin Azuoku. The purpose of that meeting was to persuade me to give up my unrealistic ambition to study in the USA. In May 1973, I was 18 years old and unemployed. If I was gainfully employed in 1973, my lifetime salary couldn't even pay for my first year of study in the USA. So to my uncle and aunt and everyone else traveling from Onitsha, Nigeria to the USA and raising the travel, tuition, and boarding funds to live and study in America for 4 years and doing them in May 1973 seemed as far-fetched as Nigeria aiming to send a Nigerian astronaut to the moon. For those reasons, my uncle and aunt cautioned me to be realistic in my ambitions and to instead lower my expectations and continue my studies in Nigerian universities, then only admitting about 1,000 students a year into campuses in the 6 cities of Lagos, Ibadan, Ife, Zaria, Benin City, and Nsukka. In contrast, the USA has 5,000 universities. By mid-September 1973, I was jobless, restless, and killing time at 6 Wilkinson Road, Onitsha, that was located a short stroll from the Metropolitan College. If I'm not in Onitsha, I might hang around the neighborhood of St. Patrick's College, Asaba, or be at 41 Bishop Anyogu Road, Enugu. On my 19th birthday, it seemed my chances of coming to the USA had all but vanished. My biggest obstacle to coming to the USA was this: I had to receive an F1 student visa from the Consulate General of the USA in Lagos, Nigeria. A student visa to the USA was extremely difficult to get. Legend has it that only one F1 student visa was issued in a day in 1973 and at the USA Embassy in Lagos, Nigeria. The minor requirements for an F1 student visa to the USA included the Nigerian passport that was then very difficult and very expensive to obtain. I paid the equivalent of 2 years' salary to the Nigerian Chief Passport Officer at 27 Kakawa Street, Lagos. Officially, my payment was a refundable repatriation fee, but my repatriation fee went into the personal bank account of the Nigerian Chief Passport Officer. Other minor student visa requirements were passport size photos, immunization records, and medical reports. Until late September 1973, I couldn't even pay for the passport size photos that were required by the US Consulate General. In the 1973 post-Nigerian Civil War economy, it seemed unrealistic that I could pay in advance the required 1 year's tuition and board, and then provide my personal bank accounts with enough money to pay for 4 years tuition and board in the USA, and do them before age 18, and at a time I couldn't afford the bus fare to travel to the Nigerian Passport Office that was at 27 Kakawa Street off Broad Street behind Bookshop House, Lagos, Ireland, Lagos. By late May 1973, I was relenting on my ambition to study in the USA. I was unemployed. In May 1973, 3 teachers at Asaba Girls Grammar School told me that I was qualified to teach mathematics and physics in their school. In my search for a job, I traveled 70 miles away from Onitsha to the Ministry of Education in Enugu, East Central State, Nigeria, to apply for a job in the Nigeria of 1973. A formal resume, completed job application form, letters of reference, and background investigations weren't required. In June 1973, and at age 18, I was offered a job to teach mathematics and physics in an all-girls secondary school in Umudioka, East Central State, Nigeria. I got the teaching position by merely presenting my diplomas, both the General Certificate of Education at the ordinary and advanced levels. I received the first diploma from the University of London in January 1973, and after 5 external examinations in as many subjects that I took in Onitsha, I received the second diploma, called the General Certificate of Education, at the advanced level. I received that advanced level diploma from the West African Examination Council in November 1972, and by external examinations that I took in Onitsha. Ironically, I was awarded the advanced level diploma before the ordinary level diploma. That was as unusual as earning a master's degree before the bachelor's degree. In March 1972, I was an independent student living behind and between the General Hospital and the Catholic Church at Ibuzo, Midwest State, Nigeria. I studied alone and hard. I was confident not only that I also took my examinations, in reverse order. Fast forward a year to May 1973. I was unemployed and socializing with 3 secondary school teachers that were living in our compound in Asaba, Nigeria. Asaba is the sister city to Onitsha. Asaba was on the western edge of the River Niger. The 3 secondary school teachers that I was socializing with told me I was qualified to teach mathematics and physics in their school. In fact, I was surprised to learn that, even though I was only 18 years old, that I was just as qualified as they were. With that information, I saw myself in a new and positive light, and encouraged by their recommendations, I traveled to the Ministry of Education in Enugu, East Central State. To teach in Asaba, I had to apply in person in the Ministry of Education in Benin City, the capital of Midwest State. East Central State was my first choice because I had made several trips to Enugu and I was always welcome to stay with my mother's cousin, Mrs. Eunice Ndulwe, who lived upstairs at 41 Bishop Anyogo Street, Enugu. In late May 1973, I applied to teach mathematics and physics in any secondary school in East Central State, Nigeria. A week after I applied, the Ministry of Education in Enugu posted me to teach mathematics and physics at an all-girls secondary school in Umudioka, East Central State. That girls' school was 9 miles outside Onitsha and seems to have been renamed to perhaps St. Kizito Girls Secondary School. I was 18 years old when I presented myself to the principal and vice principal of the Girls Secondary School in Umudioka. I introduced myself as the school's newest teacher for mathematics and physics. The girls were pleased to see me, but the principal wasn't pleased that an 18-year-old boy was sent to teach 18-year-old girls. I sensed the female teachers giving me the cold shoulder. That was the reason I abandoned the science teaching position at the girls' secondary school in Umudioka. My rejection as a teacher in Umudioka left me jobless, but it gave me the free time to daydream about coming to the USA. I traveled to Enugu to read and research in the one-room British Council Library and in the much larger East Central State Library. I was one of the few dozen patrons that were given borrowing privileges at the Onitsha Public Library and at the British Council Library in Enugu. In late May 1973, I made a significant discovery inside the reading room of St. Patrick's College, Asaba, Nigeria. That reading room had only one hefty book and one desk. The book was called the College Blue Book. That 1970 edition of the College Blue Book was a comprehensive listing of all the 2,000 universities in the USA. 50 years later, the College Blue Book expanded to become a comprehensive guide to 12,000 institutions. The College Blue Book featured an extensive information on admission requirements, tuition fees, scholarships for US citizens, student life, and essential information that a prospective student should know. In late May 1973, I was unemployed, and therefore I had the time to write letters of inquiry to American schools. In early 1973, the first person I knew by name who was living on the continent of North America was a pen friend, a teenager named Audrey Frick, who was living in St. John's, a city on Newfoundland, Ireland, off Canada's Atlantic coast. I lost touch with Audrey Frick, but 4.5 decades later, when I tried to once again re-establish contact with her, I learned that a teenager named Audrey Murray Frick, born in 1956 in St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada, died on July 21, 1974 in St. John's, Newfoundland, and died 4 months after I arrived in the USA. In 1973, I preferred to study in the USA, not in England or West Germany or Canada. My problem was that in 1973, I had no contacts in the USA, nor did I know any person who traveled to the USA. I couldn't name 5 Americans of African descent. In January 1974, I saw a Black American for the first time. He was a young Marine guarding the gate of the US Embassy in Lagos. In February 1974, I was briefly staying at 49 Okesuna Street, Lagos. I came to Lagos from Onitsha to seek an F1 student visa. I had won a scholarship to study in Oregon, USA. As a diversion, my former classmate in Christ the King College, Onitsha, East Central State, named Chude Opade, and I went to see the new movie, Shaft. That movie was an eye-opener. It was the first time I watched the USA and Black America on a giant screen. To say that Shaft impressed me will be an understatement. As a prospective student to the USA, the College Blue Book that I discovered in St. Patrick's College, Asaba, provided me the vital information that I badly needed. In late May 1973, I had only 1 shilling or 12 pence in savings. The postage cost to the USA was 9 pence. So I had only 1 shot at one of the 2,000 institutions in the USA. Using my intuition on which school is most likely to award me a scholarship, I wrote to Stan Kenyon, a university registrar in Monmouth, Oregon, USA. I had obtained Stan Kenyon's contact from the College Blue Book that was the only book in the only reading room in Asaba of May 1973. Because I was unemployed, I didn't have another 9 pence to write a second letter to the USA, which will double my chances of coming to America. For that financial reasons, I gave up on applying for university admission to the 2,000 schools in the USA. As a Black African-born supercomputer scientist in the US who conducted his research alone, my wilderness years were from June 20, 1974 in Corvallis, Oregon, through July 4, 1989 in Los Alamos, New Mexico. During my decade and a half as a supercomputer scientist, I felt like the rebel scientist punished and exiled to the inhabitable region and the frigid winters of the Russian Siberia. On the Christmas Day of 1989, the year I won the highest award in supercomputing, I was alone and I programmed the 65,536 or the 2 raised to power 16 slowest processors in the world and across an internet that's a global network of those processors. I programmed my 64 binary thousand processors to solve as many initial boundary value problems in mathematical physics. I discretized and reduced each of my problems to a system of equations of computational linear algebra. That was my mathematical representation of a physical problem, such as the problem of foreseeing the climate change that can occur within a region of the atmosphere of the Earth, or the problem of predicting the sea level rise within a region of the oceans of the Earth. On Christmas Day of 1989, I programmed for 16 hours, and I ate only peanut butter sandwiches and apples for my lunch and dinner. It was on the 31st of December 1989 that I ended my exile to the unknown field of knowledge that was then in the realm of science fiction and now known as the world's fastest computing. I ended that exile in 1989 because I won the highest award in supercomputing that computer scientists refer to as the Nobel Prize of Supercomputing. That was the highest acknowledgement of a person's contribution to supercomputing. For those reasons, I received my first significant media attention. I also received the attention of scientists who rejected my contributions to the world's fastest computer. For years, most computer scientists mocked the technology of using the world's slowest processors to attempt the world's fastest computing and dismissed it as a tremendous waste of everybody's time. Today, the world's fastest computer is powered by millions of off-the-shelf processors instead of one custom manufactured processor. That paradigm shift or change in the way we look at the supercomputer is my contribution to computer science, and computer science textbooks have been revised to account for the new definition of the world's fastest computer. During the 1970s and 80s, my contribution to parallel supercomputing, the key technology that powers the world's fastest computers, supercomputers, was rejected a dozen times. If rejection was an Olympic game, I would have won its gold medal. I began programming the world's fastest computers on June 20, 1974, and began by programming a scalar supercomputer that was at 1800 Southwest Campus Way, Corvallis, Oregon, USA. 7 years earlier, that supercomputer was rated as the world's fastest computer. In Corvallis, Oregon, I stood out because the Pacific Northwest region was one of the whitest regions in the US. Hence, Oregonians that never met me presumed that I was white. Often, I did things backwards, just like I earned the General Certificate of Education at the advanced level before earning that certificate at the ordinary level. I won a scholarship to a university in Oregon and did so 6 months before I was admitted into that university. I applied for admission when I received a scholarship from the USA that was dated September 10, 1973. That scholarship letter was my turning point. After I arrived in the USA on March 24, 1974, I discovered that Stan Kenyon worked behind the scenes to get me that scholarship. In late March 1974, I was one of only 3 Nigerians that were living in the small town of Monmouth, Oregon. In 1974, Monmouth was a strikingly old-fashioned, tight-knit community of 6,000 persons that had no resident black family. Monmouth had no public transportation, including a bus service. Monmouth is within the Willamette Valley, an area that has lots of bike trails, winding through covered bridges and scenic backcountry roads. In 1974, it was against the law to sell alcohol in Monmouth, Oregon. In Oregon, a question that I was often asked was this: where are you from? Nigeria, Africa, I answer. Why did you choose Monmouth instead of New York? I learned about Monmouth in May 1973 and from the college Blue Book. It was the only book in the reading room of St. Patrick's College, Asaba, Nigeria, a secondary school that was a short walk from my residence. I picked Monmouth, Oregon, because my intuition told me to start from a very small town. When I began supercomputing back on June 20, 1974, in Corvallis, Oregon, USA, I did not know anybody that was interested in physically executing the fastest computing in the world and doing so across the slowest processors in the world and across an internet that's a global network of those processors. But if they existed elsewhere, I could count them on the fingers of one hand. In 1974, the term supercomputer scientist was not in any computer science textbook. There were no journal articles on a world's fastest computer that's powered by 1 billion processors. No textbooks, no courses, no research grants, no conferences. A radical change on how we look at the supercomputer occurred on July 4, 1989. It occurred because my 65,536 slowest processors in the world defeated the fastest computer in the world and defeated it by an overwhelming margin and defeated it by solving the most compute-intensive problems at the crossroad where the frontiers of mathematics, physics, and computing intersect. Inventing the world's fastest computer demanded a deep knowledge of the most complicated mathematics. That was the precondition to harnessing millions of processors at once and to solving the most compute-intensive mathematical physics problems. I'm the subject of school essays because I conclusively provided the quote-unquote final proof that harnessing up to 1 billion processors that outline a supercomputer is a viable path to finding the answers to some of the biggest questions at the frontiers of 21st century science and medicine, such as deeply understanding how COVID-19 spreads across Nigerian buses that pack passengers like sardines. I discovered that the first supercomputing across the world's lowest computers is not science fiction. My discovery made the news because I was the first person to answer the most difficult mathematical question arising at the intersection of physics and computer science. If just one processor stumbled, all 1 billion processors would fall at once. The world's fastest computation that I executed on July 4, 1989, and across the world's slowest processors was the final proof that supercomputers should be powered by up to 1 billion processors. Thank you very much.
Insightful and brilliant lecture.